Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio. Hello and happy Friday. I'm Holly Fry.
And I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
We talked about monarch butterflies this week.
We sure did.
And I didn't once drop into my 10-year-old child self and talk ad nauseum about the monarch from Venture Brothers. Which is one of my favorite animated shows, and the monarch as a villain, ? Is a spectacular and very fun character. That show, obviously, a little more adult in theme, but really, really wonderful. And they do have a whole thing about milkweed on one of the episodes.
Oh, fun!
And how the monarch became the monarch.
Mm-hmm.
Who I won't do his voice. It's pretty great, but this is one of those things that I am curious about, and I'm going to kind of crowdsource from listeners if they're interested in participating. Because, Tracy, I bet you, like me, probably at some point in elementary school, went to see like a monarch chrysalis situation on a field trip. Or they came to you in some way.
Yeah, so I remember this in two different places. And one was, we had a place that at the time was called the Nature Science Center, which was a nature museum type place aimed at children. And I remember there they would have like the little stem of milkweed with the little chrysalis on it. And you could see what was going on with lots of interpretive signs about butterflies. But then I also remember something that probably was like ordered from a science supply store or something that was like a little classroom, tiny little terrarium type thing in the classroom.
Yeah. I am wondering, and my question to listeners, if anybody has insight, is whether or not they're doing those field trips these days, even like pre-pandemic, because I feel like there are so many more digital resources than we didn't have digital resources when we were in elementary school. So I'm wondering if there's still that kind of like in-person learning experience, or if the that's transitioned more to digital and online stuff. I do know that Epcot during Flower and Garden Festival or during Food and Wine Festival, Epcot at one point during the year does do like a monarch garden, and they'll sometimes have a little roosting area that you can go look at. But I think it would be hard to plan for. You got to kind of catch it at the right time by accident. But yeah, so I'm curious if you have kiddos that are elementary school age and they have done a monarch, study, what if they're still doing in person, or if they are, as I suspect, possibly many doing online these days. They're so beautiful. I love them so much. One of my favorite running outfits was the dress that I painted to look like a giant monarch butterfly, because I am ridiculous. I also wanted to mention there was an interesting thing about Catesby's 2-volume work, Natural History, and why it took him 20 years to get the second volume out, and a pretty long time to get the first volume out. And it didn't merit inclusion. We already included a lot of biographical information about people to kind of give timeline context, and I didn't want to keep getting bogged down in that. But when he came back, even though the Royal Society had paid for all of it, they didn't like pay for his book to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very much a hands-on person, and he did not have the funds to like pay a printer the normal going rate to get his book published. So he learned the book publishing process himself, like how to do book plates, how to do everything.
Oh, wow.
So some of that delay is a learning curve for him. And then he sold it via subscription model. It was like the original Indiegogo or GoFundMe kind of thing, where like, if it meets its goal, I can publish this book. I just thought that was all very fascinating.
Yeah. We've talked about various people that have like the model of getting subscribers to get your book printed. But not the learning how to do it yourself part.
I'm going to learn how to run a press. I'm going to figure out. It appeals to my soul, that kind of DIY approach.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about, was it when we were in, I don't know, it was on our West Coast tour. There was a bookbinder museum that I went to.
Mhm.
And I was literally the only person in the museum. So I basically got like a just by myself guided tour of the whole place. There are a lot of steps in bookbinding methods that involved urine. So
Yes.
if you're not schooled in the usage of all of the urine parts, that seems like it might be particularly unpleasant.
There's a lot of work in the whole thing. So, hats off to you, Mr. Catesby, in history for learning how to do all of that yourself. This was a really interesting one because I knew about Catalina's story.
Mhm.
She since remarried and she has a different last name. I didn't include it in the episode because, as we mentioned, like while she has done some stuff and she has worked with some conservation groups and butterfly interest groups, she's not a big, like, I want to be out there in the public eye person, which is why I did not include her current last name, even though it's not that hard to find. And I want her to have credit for what she did, but I also want to make sure, you and I normally would not include a person who is still alive in the podcasts. She's an outlier in that regard, so I wanted to be as like hyper respectful of her privacy.
Yeah, we have still living people that come up from time to time, but a lot of times they are still living people who are like a lot more publicly visible
Yes.
than she is. And so if so-and-so is a leading academic researcher who does public history all the time, blah, 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 like that's a different situation from like a private citizen who is maintaining a pretty private life at this point.
Yeah, and she has even said in interviews, like, I like my quiet life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't want to mess with that. I did notice there was an interview she did with a butterfly group where someone was asking how she viewed this whole thing. And she was saying, people got it wrong for so long and it's getting better, but also I'm obviously not directly quoting, but basically like because there have now been decades of misinformation, it's really hard to course correct for a lot of it, which is just an interesting thing to consider. It's kind of like, I wanted to include that aspect of it because we talk all the time about how, there are versions of history that get completely inadvertently even, or vertently, I don't know, kind of written in a way that eliminates key elements or key people in them. And that was one. And it was the same reason that I wanted to include that discussion of the fact that Petiver getting all of his amazing samples, which are lauded still as being like such an incredible collection, is tied to really nefarious and not rosy and delightful pieces of our history.
Yeah.
We we always joke that every piece of history we talk about we always discover is traced back to racism and slavery in many cases. But I really had not thought about how much naturalist and biological history and our knowledge was tied to the slave trade until I read that paper. And then I was like, oh.
Yeah. And also in other parts of the world, like colonialism and.
Right.
Yeah.
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 The good news is you can grow milkweed at home. Which I ordered a bunch. And I literally, while I was working on this, I texted a bunch of my friends. It was basically like, by the way, you're all going to start growing milkweed. I already ordered seeds for everybody. I hate to be bossy, but the butterflies need us. I have had various stabs at growing flowers and nectar plants for insects here in my yard with varying degrees of success. But one of the things that I will say, and if you go check out monarchjointventure.org, which we mentioned at the end of the podcast, they will link you to resources. But one of the things that I did read multiple times is that you should get local milkweed, like the milkweed that naturally grows in your area, because a lot of places sell tropical milkweed. And that will actually confuse sometimes insects into thinking it's not time to move on. I don't know if that's true. I'm not an entomologist, but definitely like local is always better for your area if you're trying to participate in a project like this. So it's easy peasy. You'll have some fun flowers. And then maybe you'll also get cute visitors. Who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things that came up in several articles, particularly in this last week where the extinction endangered species listing was made, is that several people in the science community have noted, like, this is one of the first species that a lot of people in North America feel a natural connection to because they see them in their yards. And
Sure.
so hopefully the hope is that, one, people will want to do, like, take those simple steps of, like, growing local flowering plants so that insects in your area that are important to the whole biosphere of your area will continue to thrive, but also that it will kind of help people make a bigger connection to conservation and
Mm-hmm.
to making bigger efforts towards conservation of species that they maybe don't have that personal connection to. So that is my hope, my hope, my hope. If you start growing milkweed, send us pictures. Tell us all about it and about your success because I'm very curious. I hope we all do such things because I think that would be great. It's easy. You can even do it in a planter. You don't have to have a big tract of land. So hopefully we'll all improve things and the butterflies will bounce back. I hope. Oh, Tracy, we talked about Weegee this week.
Mm-hmm.
He was tricky for me in some ways, which you discovered there were parts where I had started a sentence and just vanished during it because there were things about his life that I did not know how to describe in a way in a way that would be appropriate for our show because he was, as we talked about, a womanizer in a way that had some very misogynist leanings.
Mm-hmm.
Like he at one point in his autobiography talked about offering lessons to women who wanted to take photography lessons for their hobby. And he wrote about them, quote, "Any woman who takes up photography as a hobby has something emotionally lacking in her life. She must be emotionally starved, as I was." So it's like this 1-2 punch where he's like, you wouldn't do this unless you needed a thrill, but I also understand because I needed a thrill. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
little, he always has this kind of duality where he is self-deprecating at the same time he's insulting other people, and I think in his head that makes it okay.
Mm.
I was pleasantly surprised, though, about the ways that he championed in his writing, like not making spectacles out of people who were different. He had this very personal sense of right and wrong, and he relays this one story in his autobiography where he was asked for photos of what this editor from another magazine that was not New York called abnormal fellows, and what he meant was men who wore women's clothing. And in it, Weegee said that he called that editor and said, "You're not getting the pictures. What's abnormal to you is completely normal to me." Like he just was like, "No, I'm not going to exploit somebody for
Yeah.
your thing." So he had this voyeuristic tendency, but he was also really weirdly protective of people on the fringe of society. It's very, very fascinating. The New Yorker had a write-up about him in which they they put it succinctly and much better than I could, where they described him as both exploitative and humane, which is
Mm-hmm.
a weird combo, but it's part of what makes him so fascinating to me. We mentioned his photos of Dr. Strangelove. And if you are doing calendar math, you may go, wait a minute, Strangelove didn't come out until the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the scoop is there. It is always specifically mentioned as a thing that happened when he was in Hollywood, but he was back in New York before that happened. So I don't know if it's like a thing where, and I saw that reported in multiple places. So I wanted to mention it here because it is a little bit weird. I'm not sure what the scoop is there, unless he just got called back by Kubrick for that. There is also an interesting side story about his life that when he was working at Acme, he was also a fiddle player and he started playing in a movie theater orchestra
Huh.
for a while, and that he hated talkies because once they became a thing and sound attached to picture was more common, he couldn't do that job anymore, which he apparently really loved. And he claimed that he always hated talkies for the rest of his life.
I mean, that seems like a logical grudge to hold.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to mention, because I'm sure someone will ask, he was Jewish. we didn't mention it in the show because it's kind of like when we talked about Theda Bara, he would say things like, oh, I took this holiday off, but he never talked about actually observing any religious practices.
Mm-hmm.
It's unclear how connected he was to that as part of his identity versus like those just being the few days he would take off a year, because he was a workaholic without question.
Yeah.
You know, he both wrote about himself, and it's corroborated by other accounts that like there would be times when, for example, like a gangster was expected to be arrested, and so press would start to camp out around that person's apartment building, and the other guys would take shifts, and Weegee would just stay the whole time. Like, even if it took 3 days, he would not leave. So he kind of had his circadian rhythms were different than everyone else's. I'll just say that. He could not handle the 9-to-5 day job situation.
Yeah.
The other fun factoid about him is that he estimates that in his time at Acme, he took photographs of more than 5,000 murders, which is a lot.
That's so many.
It is so many.
I have conflicted feelings about all the crime scene photography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like we said, he could be very exploitative and also very humane. It's really interesting to me, especially like when you see the ways he took those pictures is usually pretty unromanticized, right? It is a straight photo of like a corpse on the ground. And then when he takes pictures of people that were often outsiders, there is often a little bit more of a loving, warmer setup to them, which you can see like he feels a greater connection to outsiders, right? He even talks about like what other people found beautiful, he rarely did. Like he talked when he was at Vogue about finding models kind of like just weird. He didn't understand them. They didn't seem to understand themselves, in his opinion. He didn't find anything attractive about a model, but he was perfectly happy to like meet girls on the street and just be like, you want to get in my car? And then they would drive around for a while and maybe hook up. So it's a little bit of a strange thing, you know? Yeah. Weegee. Some of his pictures are so beautiful. Some are so upsetting. There's everything in between.
Yeah.
If you go looking, know that you're probably going to see some blood at minimum.
Yeah, I find the really distorted ones unnerving.
I don't love them, but I don't know if it's because I, grew up and came to be interested in photography and art at a time when he had been so much before that I had already seen that kind of photo playing and editing kind of played out, like to the point where when I actually realized that I was looking at his work, I was like, meh, seen it. Mm-hmm. I mean, his pictures of New York at night are the real like meat and potatoes of his work, and really like the ones that I think most people find the most engaging, versus his later stuff where he was kind of, it seems, much more purposely trying to figure out new ways to make pictures and to make them interesting versus just capturing what was interesting about any given scene on its own. Anyway, that was Weegee. If you have time off this weekend, I hope you look at some good art. It's just good for your soul. If you don't have time off, I am sorry. And I hope that it is as restful as can be and that you do find some moments of solace. Look at some pretty art that makes you happy. And I hope all of your responsibilities play out as beautifully and ideally as possible. Everybody be good to each other. You will find us right back here tomorrow with a classic, and then starting on Monday, we'll have new stuff for you.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.